Where in the Constitution does it say that the Secretary of State can override the First Amendment protections of free speech? Is there a footnote that I missed somewhere?
There's no constitutional right to a student visa. There's a statute that says the Secretary of State gets to determine whether someone is a threat. We deny visas every day all over the world.
Do you think that
I will continue to revoke the visas of these people that come here to tear this country?
You said that, Mr. Secretary. Let me reclaim my time because...
She walked in with a script, a strategy, and what she thought was an airtight case. A Turkish graduate student, a newspaper op-ed, masked federal agents pulling someone off the street, and one senator who she was convinced had overstepped the Constitution itself. Pramila Jayapal came into that hearing room loaded for bear, and for a moment, watching her open, you could see exactly what she was going for. The emotional gravity of it, the moral weight, the imagery of armed, unidentified government agents whisking away a young woman who did nothing more than write her opinion in a college newspaper. It was designed to be devastating. And then Marco Rubio opened his mouth, and everything she built started coming apart, piece by piece, argument by argument. Not through anger, not through deflection, but through something far more dangerous to her strategy: the law. Because here's what Jayapal was counting on.
The State Department approved the revocation of a student visa for Rumeysa Öztürk, a Turkish citizen who is a graduate student at Tufts University, apparently simply for writing an op-ed. According to an internal State Department memo, you took this action under your discretionary authority to revoke visas, and soon after you revoked her visa, armed and masked plainclothes officers snatched Ms. Öztürk off the street and transported her to a prison in Louisiana. Mr. Secretary, do you really think that Ms. Öztürk's op-ed results in a foreign policy consequence for the United States?
I believe that case involves someone whose visa we never would have granted had we known ahead of time.
I'm not asking you that question. I'm asking you if you think an op-ed, but that's exactly, in fact, what happened. The State Department wrote a memo concluding that you did not have sufficient grounds to revoke Ms. Öztürk's visa. There was no evidence showing that she'd engaged in any activities or a threat to national security. And in fact, in May, a federal court ordered Ms. Öztürk's release from detention, noting that the sole basis for the government's detention appeared to be the fact that she co-authored this opinion piece in the Tufts newspaper in March of 2024. Where in the Constitution does it say that the Secretary of State can override the First Amendment protections of free speech? Is there a footnote that I missed somewhere?
There's no constitutional right to a student visa.
But is there a constitutional right? Does it say somewhere that Marco Rubio gets to determine which speech is appropriate and revoke student visas based on what you think constitutes free speech?
There's a statute that says the Secretary of State gets to determine whether someone is a threat. We deny visas every day all over the world.
Do you think that the Immigration and Nationality Act trumps the Constitution of the United States, Mr. Secretary?
Well, Congress can always change the law if you want, but I'm telling you,
Mr. Secretary,
while I have the authority, I will continue to revoke the visas of these people that come here to tear this country apart.
You said that, Mr. Secretary. Let me reclaim my time because you are talking about revoking student visas based on what somebody says. And that means that you are trumping the legal supreme court, the supreme law of the land, which is the Constitution of the United States.
No one has a right to a student visa.
Mr. Rubio, why did the administration need to use masked, armed, unidentified agents to whisk somebody off the street and deny her counsel for almost 24 hours after her arrest?
Well, you'll have to ask the agencies that did that work. I'm not responsible. I'm responsible for revoking the visas of these people that come to tear this country apart.
Secretary Rubio, I'm talking about this particular case where you revoked the student visa of a Turkish citizen who was a graduate student who wrote an op-ed that you didn't like. And suddenly you allowed for masked men to whisk her off the street. And you have multiple jobs, apparently. You're the national security advisor as well. So don't tell me it's not your job who snatches her off the street.
We don't do the snatching, but I can tell you we do the visa revocations.
Let me ask you about the national security consequences of people, masked men on the streets, snatching people off the streets. If these are legitimate law enforcement agents carrying out proper arrests, why are they hiding their identities?
Because then radical crazies will try to hurt them.
So you think that U.S. agents who have almost always gone without face coverings, even when they're arresting some of the country's most dangerous criminals, suddenly have so much to fear from a graduate student who wrote an op-ed that they need to be masked?
Again,
is that
law
accurate?
student was a guest in the United States on a student visa. No one's entitled to a student visa.
So you revoked her student visa based on an op-ed which trumps the Supreme law of the land, which is the Constitution.
Someone's coming up here to stir up problems on our campus. We're going to revoke their visa.
She didn't do any of that. She wrote an op-ed.
Well,
she wrote an op-ed, and I'm talking to you about her particular case.
Claims and your claims. Those are not the facts.
You reclaiming my time. You revoked her student visa because she wrote an op-ed.
Would you revoke? We're going to do more.
I have another question for you. Would you revoke the visa of someone in the United States who published claims that, quote, Jews are an untrustworthy and dangerous group? Yes or no?
We will revoke the visa of anyone who's in this country as a guest who's here to stir up trouble.
Are you going to revoke the visa of somebody who made that?
I mean, the case. I'll look at it. I'm looking to get crazy people out of our country.
Actually, it's not just about revoking. You actually, Secretary Rubio, excuse me, reclaiming my time. Can you explain to me why the Trump administration granted refugee status to Charles Kleinhaus, the white Afrikaner who tweeted that exact statement that I just said? There's the case.
That's not a visa.
You granted that person
to
enter the United States.
That's someone that applied here through a totally different process.
Secretary Rubio,
visas are a privilege.
Secretary
we deny
Rubio,
them all the time,
you
and we'll revoke
revoked
them.
a visa based on an op-ed, and then you allowed for masked men to snatch somebody off the street.
Your time's expired. That's your claim. That's not accurate.
Recognize.
She was counting on Rubio getting defensive, getting emotional, getting pulled into the narrative she was constructing in real time, for the cameras, for the clips, for the moment that would live on social media for the next 48 hours. That's the play. You've seen it 100 times in these hearings. Create the gotcha, bait the reaction, let the audience fill in the rest. But Rubio didn't take the bait, not once. Instead, he did something that completely neutralized her entire approach. He separated the legal questions she was deliberately collapsing into one, and that single move changed everything. Here's the distinction that Rubio kept returning to, the one that Jayapal kept trying to blur. The FA1 protects free speech. That is not in dispute. No serious person is arguing that the government can criminally prosecute someone for writing an op-ed. That protection is real, it is robust, and it applies. But here is what is also true. A foreign national holding a student visa does not have a constitutional right to remain in the United States indefinitely. A student visa is a discretionary immigration status. It is governed by statute, specifically the Immigration and Nationality Act, which gives the Secretary of State the legal authority to revoke visas when the conditions for holding one are no longer met. These are two separate legal lanes, and Jayapal kept trying to merge them into one. Every time she framed the revocation as a First Amendment violation, Rubio pulled the conversation back to immigration law. Every time she tried to make it about what Rumeysa Öztürk said, he redirected to what the law allows the State Department to do. Not what feels right, not what looks good on camera, what the statute actually says. That is not an emotional argument, it is a legal one. And in a room where one side is playing chess and the other is playing to the crowd, the chess player has a structural advantage that emotion simply cannot overcome. Now let's talk about the masked agents, because that was clearly the most visceral part of Jayapal's argument and the one she kept returning to. The imagery is intentional. Masked, armed, unidentified officers, a young woman taken off the street, no counsel for nearly 24 hours. It is designed to produce a specific emotional response, and it does. But when she pushed Rubio on it, his answer was direct. Officers who carry out arrests face real threats when their identities are publicly known. Masking is a standard safety measure that has been used across law enforcement contexts, not an indicator of wrongdoing, not a signal that something illegal is happening, but a basic operational precaution. And when she pressed further, are you really saying that agents need masks to arrest a graduate student who wrote an op-ed? Rubio drew the clearest line of the entire exchange. We don't do the snatching, we do the visa revocations. Two different agencies, two different authorities, two different questions. She tried to hold him responsible for the operational decisions of agencies that don't report to him, and he simply refused to accept the premise. Then came the moment she thought would finish him. She asked whether Rubio would revoke the visa of someone who publicly stated that Jews are an untrustworthy and dangerous group. He said yes without hesitation. She then pivoted immediately to point out that the Trump administration had recently granted refugee status to a white Afrikaner who she claimed had made a nearly identical statement. On the surface, it looks like a devastating contradiction. If you're willing to revoke a visa for that kind of speech, how do you justify granting refugee status to someone who said something similar? But here's why that comparison doesn't hold legally. Student visas and refugee status are not the same thing. They are not governed by the same laws. They do not go through the same process. They are not evaluated by the same standards or the same agencies. Comparing them as if they are equivalent categories is not a legal argument. It is a rhetorical move. It is designed to create the appearance of hypocrisy without actually establishing one under the law. Rubio saw it coming, and he didn't let it land. So what are you really watching when you watch this exchange? You are watching two completely different frameworks for how political arguments are supposed to work collide in real time. Jayapal's framework is built on narrative, emotion, and public moral weight. Her questions are designed to produce feelings first and analysis second. She is not primarily trying to extract information. She is trying to build a case in the court of public opinion, in the moment, on camera. Rubio's framework is entirely built on statutory authority and legal structure. He is not interested in the moral narrative she is constructing. He stays locked in to what the law says, what authority exists, and what falls within or outside his jurisdiction. Every time she tries to expand the conversation into emotional and moral territory, he contracts it back to the statute. That is his superpower in this exchange, and it is the reason her strategy fails. Because her entire approach depends on him engaging with the narrative. It depends on him defending the imagery, justifying the optics, explaining the moral reasoning behind the policy. The moment he refuses to do that, the moment he keeps returning to the law, she has no ground left to stand on. She came with emotion, he came with statute, and he never left it. That does not mean the policy is above criticism. That does not mean every question she raised is without merit. There are real debates to be had about how immigration enforcement intersects with civil liberties, about how discretionary authority can be used or abused, about whether targeting of students for expressive activity sends a chilling message that extends beyond any single case. Those are legitimate conversations, but you cannot have them by collapsing legal categories that are distinct, by treating a visa revocation and a First Amendment violation as the same thing, or by expecting a cabinet secretary to accept responsibility for the operational decisions of agencies outside his chain of command. Rubio understood the terrain. Jayapal came with a script, and when the script met the statute won. Now I want to hear from you. Do you think Marco Rubio was right to stay locked in the law and refuse the emotional framing entirely? Or do you think Jayapal was raising something important that the legal argument doesn't actually answer? Because that tension between what the law allows and what it should allow is where the real debate lives. Drop your take in the comments. This is the conversation worth having.